Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive.
hmm
Today, we're tackling a case that's, I think, on everyone's minds these days.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
The Idaho 4 murders.
Absolutely.
It's hard to escape the headlines,
Yeah.
and everyone's talking about it online, and
Yeah, you see it
you
everywhere.
see it everywhere. And we're going to take a deep dive into this case, but specifically a mystery that's really kind of chilling
Yeah.
at the heart of it. And that is the lack of DNA evidence
Right.
connecting Brian Kohberger to the crime scene.
Yeah.
Except for one thing.
Right.
A tiny little trace of touch DNA on the snap button of that knife sheath.
That's the question, isn't it? It's the only thing that directly links him
Right.
to the crime scene. It's like finding one fingerprint in a room full of chaos.
Right. And you think, with a crime of this magnitude,
Yeah.
you've got 4 victims, you've got a struggle, a weapon.
Right.
You'd think there would be DNA everywhere.
You would think so.
So how is that even possible?
Yeah. Well, it's certainly intriguing, isn't it? I mean, it makes you think that he must have gone to some extraordinary lengths
Yeah.
to not leave a trace. And we know that there was a meticulous side to him.
Right.
If you remember, he was still cleaning his car and getting rid of things weeks after the murders.
Oh, wow.
Even when he was back home with his parents.
Right.
What does that tell you?
It paints a picture of someone who is incredibly careful,
Yeah.
maybe even obsessed, but not leaving any trace of himself.
Absolutely.
Now, you mentioned touch DNA.
Yeah.
Can you kind of walk us through that a little bit?
Sure.
Because I think a lot of people are hearing that term, and they're like, what does that even mean?
Yeah, touch DNA is pretty much just what it sounds like. It's the DNA that you leave behind when you touch something.
Okay.
Usually it's a very small amount. Often it's just skin cells.
Okay.
So it's not as definitive as, say, a blood stain,
Oh, right.
which would have a much larger quantity of DNA. In this case, it means that investigators were able to isolate enough of Kohberger's DNA from that snap button
Right.
to make a match. But it doesn't tell us when he touched it or under what circumstances.
So the prosecution has this one piece of the puzzle,
Right,
this crucial piece of evidence that his DNA is on the sheath of the murder weapon,
right,
but no other physical trace of him at the scene.
right.
So that must make building a case very challenging.
It certainly adds a layer of complexity to it.
Yeah.
It means that they'll have to rely a lot more heavily on other forms of evidence, like
Yeah.
eyewitness accounts, cell phone data, and any surveillance footage they've been able to gather.
And speaking of surveillance footage,
Yeah,
let's talk about that leaked video that's been making the rounds online.
right,
It supposedly shows a car that looks a lot like Kohberger's white Elantra
right.
driving near the crime scene on the night of the murders.
Yeah,
But the problem is there's some debate about whether it's authentic or not
right.
because the timestamps seem off compared to some of the other evidence.
Exactly. And this is where the lack of reliable information becomes a breeding ground for speculation.
Oh, absolutely.
The probable cause affidavit lays out, the timeline of Kohberger's car movements that night
Right.
based on official surveillance footage. But this leaked video throws a wrench in the works, doesn't it?
It does.
Suddenly, everyone is a detective
Oh, yeah.
trying to piece together this puzzle with, missing pieces.
With this incomplete information,
Yeah.
which leads us to the gag order.
Yeah,
And the gag order has been a major point of contention in this case.
sure.
It's meant to prevent the spread of information that could potentially be prejudicial before the trial.
Right.
But it's also created this sense of secrecy that has just fueled all sorts of crazy theories.
It's a tricky situation, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, on the one hand, you want to protect the integrity of the judicial process
Yeah.
and make sure that Kohberger gets a fair trial.
Right.
But on the other hand, the lack of transparency creates a vacuum.
Yes.
And that gets filled with rumors and conjecture. Right.
And that can be incredibly damaging.
And we saw that firsthand with the speculations surrounding the surviving roommates,
Yeah.
especially Dylan Mortensen. I mean, she was subjected to some pretty awful accusations online
Oh, yeah.
based on nothing more than just little snippets of information taken out of context.
That's the danger of this kind of information void, right?
Right.
People are curious. They want answers.
Yeah.
And in the absence of facts, they'll turn to speculation and sometimes even outright fabrication.
Right.
And it's crucial to remember that everybody involved in this case,
Right.
including the surviving roommates, deserves to be treated with respect and compassion.
Absolutely. It's a good reminder for all of us to be careful about what we share
Yeah.
and to really critically evaluate the information that we're consuming,
Right.
especially in a case as sensitive as this one. Now, there's another piece of this whole information puzzle we
Yeah.
need to talk about, and that's this debate over the demolition of the crime scene house. Right, right. This has been a point of contention between the University of Idaho, who owns the property,
Right.
and some of the victims' families.
Okay.
The university initially planned to demolish the house, but they've postponed that decision until at least October.
Got it.
And while both the prosecution and the defense have indicated they don't object to the demolition,
Okay.
some of the families think the house should be preserved.
And their reasoning is?
Well, they're arguing that a jury walkthrough could be crucial to understanding the layout of the house.
Okay.
The acoustics, the spatial relationships, things that might not be captured in photos or diagrams.
Yeah, you can't really get a feel for that
Right, you can't.
just by looking at a picture.
Imagine you're a juror
Yeah.
trying to piece together the events of that night. Wouldn't you want to experience the space firsthand?
Oh, absolutely.
Get a feel for the scene, understand how sound might have traveled, see how the victims and the perpetrator might have moved through the house.
It adds a whole other dimension to the evidence, doesn't it? It's not just about seeing the scene. It's about feeling it, understanding the context
Right.
in a way that you just can't get from photos or even virtual reality.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's really interesting to think about that.
It is, yeah, it really does. It makes you think about the value of physical evidence in this digital age.
Yeah.
I mean, we're so used to relying on photos and videos and computer simulations,
Right.
but there's something to be said for experiencing something firsthand, isn't there?
Absolutely. It's like the difference between reading a book and watching a movie.
Right.
You know, they both can tell the same story,
Yeah,
but they engage different senses and they evoke different emotions.
absolutely.
But let's shift gears for a moment and talk about the victims in this case.
Yeah.
You know, their lives and their stories often get lost
Right.
in the shuffle of all the legal proceedings and all the forensic analysis.
Yeah, it's so important that we remember Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin weren't just names on a police report.
Right.
These were young people with hopes and dreams and aspirations, families that love them.
Right.
You know, their absence leaves a hole in the world that can never be filled.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Kaylee and Madison were best friends. They were practically inseparable since childhood.
Yeah.
And they were known for their vibrant personalities and their adventurous spirits.
Yeah.
Xana was described as kind and creative, a true artist.
Yeah.
She was dating Ethan, who was visiting her that night.
Right?
He was a triplet, a beloved brother and son,
Wow.
remembered for his warmth and his humor and his dedication to his fraternity.
Yeah. It's heartbreaking to think about, you know, the futures that were stolen, the milestones. They'll never reach the laughter. They'll never share,
Right.
you know, and their loss has really reverberated through their community and beyond
Yeah.
and left this wave of grief and unanswered questions.
Absolutely. And it's really sparked this national conversation about campus safety.
Yeah.
You know, the idea that something so horrific could happen in what seems like a safe environment. Like a college campus, I think, is just shaking people to their core.
It's understandable. College is often seen as this time of growth and exploration and newfound independence.
Right.
And it's supposed to be a place where young people feel safe,
Right.
you know, not vulnerable.
Right.
And this case has forced us to confront the reality that violence can really intrude on even the most idyllic settings.
Yeah. And it's highlighted the role of social media
Mm-hmm.
in shaping the public's perception of these kinds of cases.
Right.
You know, we talked earlier about all the speculation and rumors that have been circulating online.
Yeah.
But there's also been this unprecedented level of online sleuthing.
It's a fascinating phenomenon, isn't it?
Yeah.
You have these vast online communities dedicated to analyzing every detail of the case.
Right.
Poring over the evidence, sharing theories, sometimes even conducting their own investigations.
Right.
It's a double-edged sword, though.
It is.
Hmm.
On the one hand, you have all this collective intelligence working.
Right.
You know, people from different backgrounds, different expertise,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Yeah.
bringing all their perspectives to the table.
Right.
But on the other hand, you have the potential for misinformation to spread,
Absolutely.
like wildfire,
Like wildfire.
for individuals to be wrongly accused,
Yeah.
and even for the official investigation to be hindered.
Exactly. It's a reminder that while social media can be this powerful tool for sharing information, connecting with others,
Right.
it can also be a space where rumors and conjecture can easily morph into perceived truth.
Absolutely.
And we all have a responsibility to be critical consumers of information
Yeah.
and to think carefully about the consequences of what we share online.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's dive back into the investigation itself.
Okay.
What were some of the key pieces of evidence that led authorities to Bryan Kohberger?
Well, it was a combination of things, really. One of the first breakthroughs came with the identification of that white Elantra
Right.
that was seen near the crime scene the night of the murders.
Yeah.
So, through some really painstaking investigation, law enforcement was able to trace that vehicle back to Koberger, who was a PhD student in criminology at Washington State University,
Okay.
just a short drive from Moscow, Idaho.
Now, his background in criminology, I think, is one of the most intriguing aspects of this case.
It is. It's understandably fueled a lot of speculation.
Yeah.
You know, people are fascinated by the idea of a criminology student allegedly committing such a horrific crime.
Right.
But we have to be careful not to draw simplistic conclusions.
Right. Studying crime doesn't make you a criminal.
Exactly. And without a formal psychological evaluation or access to his personal history, any attempt to profile him would be purely speculative.
Right. Of course, we're not trying to play armchair psychologists here.
Right.
But we do know that Koberger was very active in online forums discussing crime and criminal psychology.
Right.
And some of his posts have even been described as disturbing, even hinting at violent tendencies.
Yeah, and while we can't definitively link his online activity to the murders,
Right.
it's certainly something that investigators are going to be examining very closely.
Of course.
They'll be looking for any patterns in his writing, any specific cases or topics that he seemed fixated on,
Yeah.
any clues that might shed light on his state of mind.
It's a reminder that the digital world can offer this window into someone's thoughts and motivations.
Yeah,
But it's often a distorted window.
it is.
You know, we see fragments, we see glimpses, but we rarely see the full picture.
Right, and that's why it's so important to avoid jumping to conclusions or making assumptions based on limited information.
Absolutely.
You know, we need to let the investigation unfold, allow the evidence to speak for itself, and trust that the justice system will ultimately determine Koberger's guilt or innocence.
So beyond the Elantra, what other evidence pointed to Koberger?
Well, cell phone data played a crucial role.
Okay.
Investigators were able to place Koberger's phone near the King Road residence on multiple occasions prior to the murders, including in the early morning hours of November 13th.
Oh, wow.
So this placed him in the vicinity of the crime scene at a time when the murders are believed to have occurred.
And then there's that DNA evidence.
Right.
That touch DNA that was found on the snap button of that knife sheath
Right.
that was left at the crime scene. It's almost unbelievable that such a small piece of evidence
Yeah.
has such a huge impact on the case.
It's a testament to the advancements in forensic science, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, we're now able to extract DNA from the tiniest of traces, and that can make all the difference in solving these crimes.
It really can.
Yeah.
And in this case, it provides that direct link
Yes,
between Koberger and the murder weapon,
it does.
making it a key piece of the prosecution's case.
Absolutely, and it highlights the meticulous nature of this investigation.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine the care that must have been taken to recover that knife sheath, to preserve it, to analyze it for any trace of DNA.
Right.
You know, it's a reminder that even in the most high-profile cases, it's often the smallest details that prove to be the most crucial.
So let's talk a little bit about the man at the center of it all,
Okay.
Brian Koberger. What can you tell us about his background?
Well, as we mentioned, Koberger was a PhD student in criminology
Right.
at the time of his arrest, which has, of course, fueled a lot of speculation.
Right.
People are very interested in the idea of a criminology student
Right.
allegedly committing such a horrific crime.
Yeah, it seems like something out of a,
It does, doesn't it?
a TV show or a movie.
Yeah, but again, we have to be careful not to draw simplistic conclusions here.
Right. Studying crime doesn't make you a criminal.
Exactly. And without a formal psychological evaluation or
Yeah.
access to his personal history,
Yeah.
any attempt to profile him would be purely speculative.
Of course, we're not trying to,
Right.
play armchair psychologist here.
Of course not.
But we do know that Koberger was active on online forums
Yeah, he was.
discussing crime and criminal psychology. And some of his posts have been described as disturbing,
Yeah.
even hinting at violent tendencies.
It's true. And while we can't definitively link his online activity to the murders,
Right.
it's certainly something investigators will be looking at
Yeah, of course.
very closely. They'll be looking for any patterns in his writing,
Okay.
any specific cases or topics that he seemed fixated on,
Uh-huh.
any clues that might shed light on his state of mind.
It's almost like the digital world offers us this window
Right?
into someone's thoughts and motivations.
It does.
But it's a distorted window.
Yeah, it's often distorted.
We see fragments, we see glimpses,
Yeah.
but rarely the full picture.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to avoid jumping to conclusions or
Right.
making assumptions
Yeah,
based on limited information.
absolutely.
Right.
Let the investigation unfold,
Right.
let the evidence speak for itself,
Right.
and trust that the justice system will determine
Yeah.
Koberger's guilt or innocence.
Absolutely.
Now let's go back to that debate.
Oh.
Over the demolition of the crime scene house.
Sure.
It seems like the University of Idaho is determined
Does seem that way.
to move forward with the demolition,
Uh-huh.
despite objections from some of the victims' families.
Right. Well, the university argues that the house is a traumatic reminder of the tragedy
Right.
and that its presence is causing distress to the community.
Uh-huh.
They also cite concerns about safety and security
Right.
as the house has become sort of this morbid tourist attraction.
But the families who oppose the demolition
Right.
argue that the house is a crucial piece of evidence
Yeah.
and that its destruction could really hinder
Right.
the pursuit of justice for their loved ones.
They worry that a jury might not be able to fully grasp the layout of the house,
Uh-huh.
the spatial relationships, the acoustics,
Right.
without being able to experience the space firsthand.
Yeah, to actually be in the space.
Right. They see the house as a tangible link
Right.
to the events of that night, and they fear that its demolition would erase a vital part of the story.
It's a difficult situation all around.
It is.
You have the university trying to balance the needs of the community
Yeah.
with the sensitivities surrounding the case.
Yeah.
And then you have these families who are just dealing with unimaginable grief and loss,
Right.
and they're desperately clinging to anything
Yeah.
that might help them find justice and closure.
And it's a reminder that while the legal system is designed to be objective and impartial,
Right.
it's ultimately about people.
It is.
It's about lives that have been irrevocably altered by tragedy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we can't lose sight of the human cost of this crime
No, we can't.
and the ripple effects
Yeah.
that will continue to be felt for years to come.
Absolutely.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the Idaho 4 murders,
Okay.
I'm left with one kind of lingering question.
Okay.
We've talked about the lack of DNA evidence beyond that knife sheath,
Yeah.
the meticulous nature of the crime, and the challenge of navigating a case that is really shrouded in secrecy.
Right.
But what if that one crucial piece of evidence that touched DNA on the snap button
Right.
had never been recovered?
It's a chilling thought, isn't it?
It is.
Would Koberger even be on the radar?
Right.
Would investigators still be searching for answers?
Well-
Chasing down dead ends?
Possibly?
It's impossible to say for sure, but it really underscores the fragility of evidence.
Yeah.
The way a seemingly insignificant detail can
Yeah.
have monumental consequences.
And it reminds us that even in this age of, advanced technology
Right.
and sophisticated investigative techniques,
Yeah.
sometimes it's a stroke of luck,
It is.
a tiny trace left behind that makes all the difference.
It really does.
It's also a reminder that justice is often a delicate balance,
It is.
a complex interplay of facts and circumstances,
Yeah.
and sometimes even chance.
Absolutely.
Well, as we continue to follow this case,
Okay.
we're going to do so with that awareness, dissecting the details,
Yeah.
analyzing the evidence,
Yeah.
and seeking to understand the truth,
Yeah.
however elusive it may be.
Absolutely.
And we encourage you to join the conversation.
Yes.
Share your thoughts
Please do.
and engage in respectful dialogue
Yeah.
on our social media platforms.
Absolutely.
And remember, this is not just a captivating true crime story.
Right.
This is a tragedy
Yeah.
that has deeply affected real people, real families.
Right.
So let's honor their memory by approaching this case
Yeah.
with empathy, critical thinking,
Absolutely.
and a commitment to seeking justice and understanding.
I think that's very well said.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
My pleasure.